Someone put a dead rat with an arrow in the front of my door.
Oh, now this is at your home.
This is at my home. So
Is this
this
the
is
first time that something now happens at your home?
correct. And the crazy thing is, like later on, I found out that, my boss lived like 5 miles away from me.
The one that you suspected doing all this kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
Yeah. And then after that meeting where I was calling her shit, like it was, I don't know, it was pretty soon after that's when the rat was at my door.
Oh, wow.
And I had to file a police report.
Welcome to 12-Week Relationships. This is your place for better relationships in weeks, not years. My name is Pye.
I'm Dr. Glen.
All right, Dr. Glen, we have a couple notes from Anthony.
Okay.
One, we got to control our lip smacking.
Yes.
That's being picked up on.
Yes. I'm going to be really mindful of that.
And then two, we got to like keep the mms.
I do that a
regular.
lot.
You do
So
that?
I'm going to concentrate these episodes and not do it as much.
I think the mhms are just much less of a concern because it keeps it active, but just right up against the mic.
like I'm eating food.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, so in episode 9, which is this episode, and in episode 10, we kind of are going to conclude this. I guess I would call it this is our introductory 10 episodes, kind of getting everybody warmed up into the platform. So in episode 9, we're going to talk about your experience in detail. And in episode 10, we're going to go to my experience in detail. And really the titles of these two episodes would be the cost of staying. I'd like our audience, I'd like people to understand, when you're in a not so great situation, whether it be a relationship, whether it be an environment, but just a toxic environment, what is the cost of that indecision or the cost of simply choosing to stay? Because we often think more so of the cost of leaving or the cost of making a change and not enough about, the ramifications, the costs of actually staying in that situation.
No, I agree. And then sometimes like when you're in this box, you're assuming you're overvaluing that box.
Yeah.
And saying like, this is the best decision, and then you're overvaluing, you're kind of bypassing like the difficulties and the struggles in it, but you're familiar with it and you're saying, hey, this is safe.
Yeah, there's this, it's the difficult that right? Mm-hmm. When you're in a bad environment, when you're in a bad relationship, whatever that might be, there's the difficult and the hard that which is right there in front of you, versus the difficult of the unknown, which is making that decision to leave or to change that environment or to do whatever you need to do. But the unknown is always more scary.
Yeah, because you don't know.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think, a lot of times people, for me personally, it was just listening to the advice and the culture that I grew up in and saying like, these are the right choices. So I must be wrong because I'm feeling something different than what I'm being told.
Yeah.
And then ultimately it's making that choice regardless. Like I'm scared, I'm uncomfortable, I accept everything that's happened, but I have to do this for myself. And then it's going outside of that box.
Absolutely. So episode 9, this one, and episode 10 are going to be probably a little bit emotionally taxing for the two of us.
Get the tissues, man.
Not that bad. But what we're kind of both hoping is that for our audience that's listening, not only can you get a better insight into why we're doing what we're doing, it really very much ties into our why behind this entire platform, because you're about to kind of go into our greatest pain, which led us to create these solutions that we did, which put us on this path. You're also going to be able to hear and understand kind of the cost of staying or the cost of continually choosing something that is ultimately unhealthy and where it leads to. And the crazy part about this is in both of these stories, that cost snowballs. You decide not to do that thing or to stay in that situation, and the cost keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger as you go. And hopefully it will help each of you guys that are listening or watching this to be able to make effective and healthy decisions a bit quicker for yourselves, at least quicker than we were able to.
Yeah, and we're not trying to promote like we're perfect and we have all the answers, but like life can be messy sometimes, and so it's just a matter of understanding and learning to make the right choices for yourself.
Yeah, life is very messy for everybody. And if people say otherwise, I'd say they're fooling themselves and trying to fool other people. Last piece before we get into this, Glenn and I have already come through the other side of these experiences. So what we're about to dive into, it's deep and it gets kind of dark, but it's important to know that we've come through the other sides to a much healthier place, a much more successful place. Specifically on Glen's side, right now you are a doctor of psychology. You work at Whittier College as a professor. You're going to have tenure soon, right?
Yeah, I'm going for tenure very soon.
And department chair?
And a department chair position coming up, yeah.
Yeah, I actually spoke with your dean and he had nothing but positive things to say about you, but he said one thing that was very specific. He was like, in all the years that I've done this, I've never worked with anyone more effective as not only a professor, but as a supervisor, everything.
Oh, that's very kind
So
of him.
it was some incredible praise from him. But you've also written several books. And I say all this because this part of this story is going to get deep. It's going to get pretty dark. And I think if you are in that position, it's important to understand that there's light at the end of the tunnel, because it can feel very much like there's not, like when you make a certain decision. And in your case, it's the decision to give up your license as a social worker, not as a anything else, but as a social worker. It can feel like the end when in reality, it can be the beginning.
No, absolutely. And, it's not a victim story. It's not a depressing story, but it's part of the journey that got me here.
Totally. Okay, let's dive straight into your story. I'm going to give the bird's eye, 1,000-foot analysis of this, just so we have like kind of an idea. And I actually have your outline pulled up on my iPad, just because both of our stories are so in depth that we want our listeners to be able to actually follow along and not be, super confused. But essentially, you start working for the government in 2002.
Correct.
2010, you get married. 2012, you're succeeding at your job, and there comes like death threats and all these different issues. You take on more duties. You have issues directly with your boss that just continue to progress. Ultimately, well, we're going to talk about all of this, including the murdered rat with an arrow in it that was left on your doorstep.
Yeah, I had to file a police report on that.
Yeah, smashed workstation, all this stuff.
All of it.
You decide to cope. And we have, I think it's important for everybody to understand that neither of us are victims in our stories.
No, and that's the thing. It's not a victim story. It's not a hero story. It's a story of just accepting what happened and then ultimately living a truth that was greater than the circumstances that I was in or you were in.
Yeah. So we take complete ownership over these decisions, and that's where, your ownership in, there was a mistake there of coping by drinking.
Yeah.
And you end up getting a DUI.
I did.
You report it to the board. They don't get back to you for a couple of years. You continue with your job in this environment. Marriage is going downhill. Everything is just kind of piling up. You open a lawsuit against the state, right?
Correct.
For this unhealthy work environment. One where you now have coworkers and a lot of people that are saying, yeah, this is terrible. This is completely unhealthy. You continue to stay, though. You're motivated by personal reasons, right? Like wanting to have a baby and those kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, the whole premise of like you stay at these jobs because you get a pension, it's
safe.
stable, you raise your family. And then even like, my own family, like I was, caring for my mother too. So there was just other factors involved. So it was just like, this was the best decision to make because it's just a stable decision. That's that's how I was thinking at the time.
Yeah.
Like, even though it was crazy, I was like, oh, this is better to stay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So eventually 2 years later, the board gets back to you, puts you on probation. You go through that. You kind of make a series of, well, I guess like careless mistakes.
I did.
And then you acknowledge them. Many of them you reported yourself. And you also have this open lawsuit against the state at the same time. And eventually this leads to a place where you break down. You leave and say, you know what? I'm going to surrender my license. I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't want to do social work anymore. Take the license. And then you settle the agreement and say, I'm going to take the money and I'm going to be done with this entire world. And you move on.
Correct. So it was a mixture of things. It was a mixture of like, I was really traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the process, I didn't know, like, it was a cumulative thing that just kept building. Like in my mind, like I thought I was able to cope okay. But eventually over the years, like it just started grinding and it started like, I started to have really like bad trauma symptoms.
Yeah.
But I was able to like continue to work and do my thing. So it looked like, I can handle, but on the side, I was really struggling with that. And then on the lawsuit side, like through the work comp side, the services I was getting wasn't really helpful. Like I wasn't getting any counseling. I was getting acupuncture and chiropractic services. And then, on the flip side, like I wasn't getting work from the the lawsuit, they were supposed to place me in another job. I didn't get placed for like 6 years.
Yeah.
And then I had a human resources worker assigning me who didn't speak English.
So these are all the details that I want to get
Yeah.
into. So we're going to rewind now. This is the 1,000-foot overview where
Yeah.
this series of, I don't want to call it indecision because there are decisions being made, but it's decisions to stay in an unhealthy environment, go from one thing to the next. At one point, this was just, you probably could have just switched your jobs and been good. At the next point, this is, now we have, okay, an unhealthy and a work environment that's I'm having to cope with in other ways. And then down the road, now we have a DUI that we're dealing with. And then we continue until it gets to this place. So let's rewind and go back to 2002. Why in the world did you want to be a social worker? Because
I know.
that is a difficult area to be in.
It was. So before social work and then getting like my master's in social work, I was working in a bank. So I was a loan officer.
Okay.
So I was doing finance. I was doing like loan processing.
This is pre-2002.
This is pre-2002. So, I was helping people like get, mortgage loans. But I was really drawn to the people that were struggling and I wanted to do more to help them. So then I was like, oh, this is a field. Like at that time, I was very passionate about it. So I was like, I want to go into this field and I want to help people that are underserved. And I really want to do my best to assist them.
Yeah.
So I went to school, graduated, and then I started working for the government.
Yeah, you have to be very passionate about social work. I had a close friend of mine who's kind of like a little sister. She said that it was shortly after she got married. She's like, I want to go into social work. And I said, don't do that. Don't do that.
You're a good friend. You're a good friend.
I mean, I was only thinking about it from one side. I was thinking about it. And if you are a social worker, bless you. Oh my goodness. This is one of the most difficult lines of work I could possibly imagine. But from my side of this, or my understanding of it, which wasn't, I don't have a huge understanding, was just that you're dealing with a lot of, these are people who can't really afford any other form of help. So you're dealing with people that have problems, lots of these problems, and nonstop each day. You're working within this system and this environment where there's really no fixing it. It's like symptom management across, tens of thousands of people that just have a litany of issues. My whole thought is, how do you not bring that home?
No, definitely. It can be really taxing. Like there's really sad stories. And then I could definitely bring that home. So the component of helping people in and of itself was a hard job.
Yeah. And then you told me about the work environment, and that made complete sense. Those of us that are generally motivated to find, you kind of gravitate towards jobs and solutions that fit the pains that you've experienced, right? So I would say it's not uncommon. I would say the majority of, therapists and psychotherapists and, psychology, and these people are people that want to understand why certain things in their own lives have happened. So they're essentially people that are putting together their own pieces. So you pair that with like, okay, everybody that you're seeing has just a range of problems that are incredible. Then you have the people that you're working with who are all kind of coming from a similar background and putting together the pieces, and you end up getting this toxic environment on both sides.
Well, not only that, and then the bureaucracy where like it's really hard to get fired.
Government bureaucracy.
And then it kind of promotes like really bad behavior. So
yeah.
Because there's like all of these kind of restrictions, and then it doesn't promote like, one of the things I was told, like this is like my first week there, was don't stand out too much because then you're going to become a target.
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, wow, that person's really showing a lot of initiative. That's awesome, right? Instead of being rewarded for it, it was like, oh, you're going to be punished for that.
I have heard, and my own father included, talked about getting government jobs because it's difficult to get fired.
It's difficult to get fired. And then everyone keeps like emphasizing the security of it. Like it's secure, but it can be really, really toxic. So, that first week, one advice was that, right? So don't stand out. And then another person, he was very wise. Like he was like 40, 50 years in. He was like, Glenn, when you go to this job, you have to emotionally put on a raincoat because you're going to get mud and dirt and all these things thrown at you. And then when you get home, you got to be able to take it off and then not personalize it so you can live your life at home.
That sounds like an impossible task. unless you're a robot. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, oh, okay, but I was I was younger at that time. Like, yeah, okay, man, like,
Yeah,
cool. Like, I was
very
just
idealistic.
very idealistic and like, yeah, cool. Like, I just want to see it all. So that was my mentality at the time.
Yeah, we need to redefine the term stability and something that's stable, because there's nothing stable about an unhealthy relationship or an unhealthy work environment, regardless of, the consistent paycheck or whatever it might be. Maybe, we've had a lot of different situations and couples who have come in, and one person is unable to make the decision to leave because they have support. They feel like it's stable. It's not stable staying in something unhealthy.
Agreed.
For any reason, because you can't give up. I don't know. Stability can't be accepting financial stability and along with it, mental instability.
But it shows people's mentality about being happy, right? Like, stability isn't really associated with happiness. It's associated with you're unhappy, but nothing too bad or too good is going to happen. And I think that's the definition that people try to live by.
Yeah. Okay. So in 2002, you start, and you mentioned also that you weren't being trained well by your supervisor.
Yeah, so we didn't do hours because you're supposed to meet like an hour a week. But he's like, just come to me when you need me. And then we would often go to Hooters. We go to Hooters, we'd have drinks.
For the wings.
For the wings, of course. For the wings, of course. But that was kind of like my intro. This is like my first job. Like,
That's
this is my
crazy.
first job in this field.
So he's super lax, super chill.
Super
not really.
chill.
Okay.
And then among like all the other supervisors, like he was considered the best because the other ones were more micromanagers. And then kind of like, even though he wouldn't provide like weekly supervision, like he was insightful when I did go to him though. Like he would give better advice or direction than the other ones.
Yeah. And during that same time, you began schooling for psychiatry then at that time?
Psychology too. So I was going to school full time, and then I was in the county full time.
Okay.
So I was working at 40 hours and then
That's
school.
a lot of
And then
work, man,
taking
in
care of my
school.
home. I mean, taking care of my parents at that time too.
Okay.
So there's a lot of responsibilities.
Yeah, that's crazy. And at the time you were 20. No, how old were you at the time? 30?
Like 28, I think.
28.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, 16. Come on, man. Because I'm only just kidding.
You look very young, Glenn.
Thank you. It's my own immaturity. That's why.
All right. So in 2010, though, this is when you got married. You also took a promotion.
Correct. So I took a promotion. It was a call center. So it's where all the suicide calls come in.
Dude, this.
And
okay.
then,
So you go from social work.
so yeah, I go from social work to dealing with the chronically and severely mentally ill, doing like assessments and then like groups and then like med management.
Can you describe what that's like for just a second before we get to the call center? Describe what from 2002 to 2010,
Yeah.
working individually with people. What was that like?
It was challenging. So it wasn't like, just everyday people that are having like relationship issues or job struggles. I mean, they have nothing. And then they're chronically ill. A lot of them have drug problems. So it's a matter of like making sure their basic needs are met, giving them resources out in the community. And then once they're somewhat stabilized, then trying to individually work with them so that they can start building their life.
Yeah.
And then it was like linking them, trying to get them to school and then trying to get them a job, along with trying to build up their mental health.
That's crazy. I'm trying to picture that for 1 second, because from the standpoint of like, coaching, whether it be individual relationship coaching or even like, psychiatry, all that kind of stuff. Usually we think of taking a certain set of problems, at least I do, to that environment. But I don't think of, having to essentially build a person up from the ground up. And that's what social work essentially is.
You have to do. And then, if you're a dedicated worker, that's what you would try and do. And then you had other people that would just do the bare minimum, take your meds and not do anything, just leave them be. So it was just, you had within that pocket, like even though it was very toxic, they were really good people.
Yeah.
But they're just kind of, in my opinion, they're being drawn out because they're being overshadowed by all of the other toxic things that were taking place.
Yeah. Okay. So 2010, you take the promotion. You're basically running a call center for a suicide hotline.
But it's not even a hotline. It's a call center that comes in, and then when people are calling, like they're suicidal, like the family member, this person's threatening to kill themselves, we take the information. We have to prioritize all the calls, and then send out teams to the community to do the suicide assessments. If they meet criteria, then we have to get a hospital bed, organize the ambulance, organize placing them in the hospital, or just setting up resources, regardless of whether they're suicidal or not.
That's wild.
So that in itself was just stressful because you're dealing with people's lives.
Yeah.
And then you're dealing with them like on a 50, 60 calls are coming in, and then it's trying to organize it and try to figure things out while we're waiting for teams, trying to figure out hospital beds. Some of them are violent, so you have to get the police involved, right? So it's just a lot of organizing.
Now you're newlyweds at this time.
Yeah.
Is this work life showing up at home at all yet?
So at the beginning, like that year, it was pretty exciting because I was just starting out, so
Yeah.
people were just getting to know me, and then I was like, wow, this is so exciting. We were getting a house, so
Still
we got
very
a house.
optimistic and
Very optimistic, and then I was like, this is so cool, and I really like the job, and I really like that I have staff, and we just got married, and we're building our life. So at the time, like I was really happy, and then I was teaching part time. Like I was teaching, in a master's program at part time. So I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like if I don't have anything else, and then we were talking about like building our life together. I was like, this is enough. Like
Yeah.
I'm cool.
yeah. Okay. It was on your honeymoon, correct? When your boss basically, so you're getting noticed at this place. You're doing a great job. You're helping the people around you, in their own schedules, their own time. Correct? Can you explain that piece of it?
Yeah. So over a period of time, like during the time I was there, I was doing really well. Like our unit, we were one of like the lower units, and then we became the top because I was organizing everything, like how the calls are done, like how even like the short assessments over the phone. I changed all of it, and then basically we started excelling. And then other units would start like, complaining, or how come they're getting this, or we would get a lot of praise. So there was like a lot of jealousy.
Okay.
We were the night shift, so we were like the 2 o'clock to 10:30 shift. So it's
Yeah.
not a desirable shift because it's a 24-hour center, right? But then a lot of people in the morning shift, which is more desirable because it's 8 to 5, right?
Yeah.
And you have more resources. A lot of people were trying to switch over at that time. So there was just a lot of like, within that unit, there was a lot of like, wow, there's a lot of changes, and there's a lot more positivity, and there was a lot of things going, even like the overtime. Like I started taking people that were really good and rewarding them with more overtime, and then kind of phasing out the people that weren't.
I see.
Like the whole unit was being transformed, and then people started to take notice.
Yeah, including your supervisor.
To my boss, and then even her bosses.
Okay.
So it became like noticeable, and then kind of like over time, things that were her duties, they would give them to me, and then they would bypass her, and then Joe just talk to me directly and give me more and more things to do.
I see. So during this time, she's basically getting upset and probably afraid that you're going to take her job.
Well, I mean, at the time I didn't know. Like there was just a lot of passive aggressive comments toward me, but like that's fine. Like I was just really focused on what I was doing. But yeah, so then I was on vacation, and
Was that your honeymoon, or was it just a vacation?
so it was a year after. So
Okay.
we had the honeymoon that year,
So like 2011.
11-ish, yeah. And then that year, we were in Japan. I think we went to Japan and Thailand, where it was like a 2.5 week vacation. Then one of the staff had a recording, and basically the recording, you could hear her saying like, when he returns, when Glen returns, and then if you guys follow anything that he says, I'm going to punish you personally. And it was on recording.
Wow.
And then so I got that, the person played it for me.
So your supervisor pulled everybody into a room
Yeah,
to say if they listen to whatever you're saying, they're going to be punished.
I'm going to be punished.
Wow.
And then that went to then I took that and I reported to the higher up than her. And she was like really nice, at least to my face. Like she said, I get it. And
That's the worst.
we got big plans for you. So this is part of the course, and you just got to stay the course. And
You're saying that your boss's boss was
Yeah.
nice to you when they got that recording.
And she was like aware of it, and she's like, yeah, we're making changes, and we have big plans for you. Like just stay the course. And then at the time I was like, yeah, okay. Cause in my mind, it's like, okay, I'm going to get a bump, or maybe like within, something else is going to open up. So I'm just going to write it out.
I mean, at that time, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. It's just
Yeah. It was just one threat.
person, one threat, one.
Yeah. And it was just that. So I was like, okay, fine. Like it was tension, but I was able to I was just focusing on what I was doing in my own unit.
Okay. When did you finish your doctorate degree?
I got it in 2006.
2006.
So during that time, like I wasn't really getting I wasn't getting supervision, but there was a psychiatrist there. And then he was really knowledgeable. So I would like literally go to him and say, I want to know what you know.
Yeah.
And then so we would sit and he would just kind of go over everything with me.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
that had to also be a threat for your boss because she probably is not a doctor of psychology,
No, she was a licensed clinician.
which that's a master's degree type.
It's a master's degree, and you do your hours, you get your 2 years, and then you take your test.
Okay. So here comes this, up and comer. He's a doctor of psychology and he's going to take over my kind of position type thing. So I'm trying to get an understanding of kind of what she was perceiving in this threat as you were coming up.
Yeah.
Okay. So then 2012, you're still doing well. And now this is when the rumors of you taking over
Start
begins.
circulating, and the people actually came to me and they're like, man, this is going downtown, and like it's circulating. And then
What does that mean? This is going downtown? Like
downtown is like the admin center. So
Okay.
like people that work in the admin, they would like, they came in and did overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh my God, like, did you hear? And I was like, I didn't hear anything. Like, I don't know
Okay.
what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
But then, then that's when it started, like the threat letters started coming in.
Wait, describe this. What threat letters?
Like, you better watch your back.
To your emails? To what?
Just random. They're placed in like my mailbox, and then it not only went to me though. It'd go to my boss, and then to all the other supervisors.
Your work mailbox.
My work mailbox and their work mailboxes, and
Wow.
then she would like look at the note. Like she would advertise it. Look at what happened to Glenn, like in front of everybody.
Like a joke?
Yeah, like she's like, oh my God, and it was like almost like semi sarcastic, and at least to me, right? And then I was like, okay, so this is where I was like, man, this is getting weird now. And then like,
None of the people that outside of the people that you work with at the office, nobody that you're helping knows where you live or work, right?
they have, yeah, I mean, you have administrators have access to that, but
No. I mean, like your patients, like your
No.
clients, the people that are
no,
on the other side of the
they don't
phone.
have access to that. No.
Okay, so this has to be, I mean, that to me is like, if you're in that organization and you see this, that would not fly today.
Yeah, I mean, back then, and then so once again, so I took all the things, I took it up to the higher than my boss, and she's like, yeah, we don't see it as a threat. We know that you're doing a good job.
What?
We're not even taking it seriously. And she's like, don't take it seriously. But
You're-
then it just kept coming. Like it just repeatedly kept coming. So it was
More of these letters.
more of these letters. So it was more of threats of like, watch your back. You better be careful. And then it just kept coming. So I literally was like, whatever. Like I just,
Even though you know that this has to be a coworker or
Someone.
your boss or
Oh, yeah.
somebody.
but that's when I started like setting more limits at work too. Like, remember, I think in the other podcast, I was like, how are you? I'm minding my business. Are you minding yours? Like that would
Okay.
be really short.
This is why, well, that now has context because
Yeah.
I don't know that I understood.
Yeah, like it was really setting limits. Hey, what'd you do? Look, man, if it's not about work, sports, or the weather, we
Yeah.
have nothing to talk about, man. Like it was setting firm limits.
Yeah.
And I just wanted the job to get done.
Crazy. Now, is this starting to have an effect at home at this point?
It is like it's starting to grate, on me. But, this is one of the things too, was like I was not aware, but like to survive in that environment, you have to kind of be like like really firm boundaries, be really assertive, sometimes to the point of like just like really setting limits.
Sure.
But that was translating at home too. Like I was getting more angrier at home too.
Interesting.
And so like I had to really catch myself and be like, man, I'm really sorry. Like this is affecting me too.
Interesting.
And so like we would fight and I was like, no, you know what? I'm still taking a lot of this at home. So I'd have to calm down and then try and have conversations with her
Yeah.
after.
You almost feel like a fight at home is the same thing as a fight at the office. So I need to respond in the same way.
Yeah. And then our marriage at the time, like we were both working so much. So she was working a night shift at that time. So she was working like, I think it was 7 p.m. to like 7 a.m. So she was just groggy and tired. We would see each other a little bit here and there, but it was definitely like, it was definitely hurting our marriage.
That's brutal. Okay. All right. So 2013, you just continue and you keep taking over more and more duties.
More and more duties, more and more assignments. So they give me more assignments to do. They're sending me to more things. And then that's where it escalated to death threats. Like, I'm going to kill you.
How often are these coming through?
Pretty regularly. You're gonna fucking die.
Wow.
Yeah. And it got really, and then the crazy thing is, like those Chick-fil-A commercials with the
Yeah.
cows and then the spelling's wrong. So whoever was sending them, they can't spell. So like there would be like all these weird wordings, like wood would be WOOD, and I'm like, are they doing this on purpose, or like do they?
I'm sure
Can they
the
not,
person-
can they just not spell?
Do you think it's your boss at this point?
I do. Because the way she's handling it, like she's acting like it's funny, right?
Oh,
And then-
she's continuing to flaunt these letters.
Yeah, continuing to flaunt it and just like who's doing this? And then the more assignments I was getting, the more she would do that. Which eventually we had a meeting. So we had a meeting, and then so her boss, my boss and me, we actually ended up having a meeting, sitting down, and I was like, look, I know you're doing it, or you're involved, or who's doing it, because if you really gave a crap, you wouldn't be acting this way.
Yeah. You wouldn't be flaunting them and making jokes of this.
Yeah. And doing all these things. And then I put everything on the table. Like I was like, please just transfer me. Like I don't want to be here. Right. And I was telling her boss, like, I don't want to be here. And then I was like, at the time, like I was like, man, I really respect this position. But in my mind, like it lost
This position
value.
Meaning her position.
Her position. But I was being really truthful. I go, it's lost value to me. Like the fact that you can have this job, it doesn't mean anything to me. I'd rather just work a second job.
Yeah.
And just counteract it and make the money that way, right? Like I was being very, very direct and honest with all of them. And then, I even told her, like, I was like, I think you're a shit, but that's an insult to shit, right? Because you're just a liar. You're just a liar. And I think you're full of shit. And then she was just in tears, and it was just, she just started breaking down. But I was like, please just transfer me. I said, please transfer me. I was like, I don't want to be here.
That's crazy.
And then I kept getting the same response, like, hey man, just wait it out. This is kind of how it is. Like this, no matter where you go, this is the dynamics that are in place, but this is how you start working your way up. And I went to other friends that were administrators, and they give me the same advice. They're like, dude, like, just wait it out.
This is how it is.
This
You
is how
get
it is.
Death
Like,
threats from your boss.
because the other person I went to, like, he was getting treated really crappy, and he was like, but I got to wait it out.
Wow.
And so his advice to me was like, dude, you got to wait it out.
Yeah, because you making the same decision that he did kind of justifies his decision, right?
Yeah, like this is why you do this,
Mm-hmm.
and this is why the pension is so good, and all of these other things. Like it was the same story over and over and over again. And so I was like, okay, but then I really wanted to go. So this is like where it was like, man, this is no longer an option for me, like to stay here. Like I want to get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned this kind of affecting your home and personal life. At this point, are you using anything else to cope? Are you drinking? Are you?
Yeah. So, that's where like, when I was working with like some veterans, like, so I had some veterans that came in for PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And then in my mind at the time, I'd be like, how can you, like, because family members would be like, man, they have decompensated so much because they bring their family members. And I'm like, how can you not know that you're not decompensating so much?
What does that mean?
Like, your level of functioning, like the war veteran, like, can you not see like what your family's describing, how healthy you were pre PTSD and then how you are now? But in their mind, I'm not changing that much.
I see.
And like in their introspection, the changes aren't that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like they haven't decompensated that much. But to the family members, they can see like, man, something's not right.
I see.
And that's what, like, to me, I was the same thing. Like, I'm like, man, like I'm drinking more. I'm a little bit more stressed. I'm more irritable, but it's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I was internalizing it at the time. I can handle this. I got this.
You're resilient.
Yeah. Like I'm resilient.
Yeah.
I got this. But in truth, I think at a distance, like people that would care about me would see like, dude, you're not doing very well.
Interesting.
Well,
Well, that's an interesting concept of resilience, right? Because you're really just running around from one fire to the next, putting them out. You said something that's very poignant on that, which is, well, I'll let you say it. Like,
well, I mean, so at the time, so once again, like when I was going through this whole process, and then we're going to get into like the timeline later when I saw a specialist,
mm-hmm.
right? But, at the time, the person told me, and this is the medical model treatment, you were really resilient. You had excellent coping skills while you were there. And then as it started like moving in a different direction and you started to have breakdowns, you became more depressed and you couldn't handle as much. That's when you became depressed and your trauma symptoms became worse. And that's kind of the medical model perspective, right? When I look back on it now, I look at it like the time that I was coping well over there was when I was the sickest. Because if I'm coping with all this chaos, that means that I'm internalizing and living in that space and I'm thriving in a chaotic space. That was when I was the sickest. And then when I started getting, I can't deal with this anymore, that was actually me becoming healthy.
Yeah.
And that became the shift for me in terms of defining what healthy is.
It makes sense. I mean, if you imagine like being in an emergency room and being an ER doctor, I mean, you're running from one emergency to the next, just doing triage and just fixing and making people, you don't have time to think about how tired you are, how exhausted you are, anything. I would imagine that it's like that in any arena where you're dealing with emergencies one after another. Just because you can run from one fire to the next and keep putting them out doesn't mean that you aren't doing damage. Doesn't mean that you aren't, sick. Doesn't mean that you aren't. But yeah, we do kind of think that way. Like if you're busy and you can just keep juggling and keep doing this, then you must be super healthy. And
yeah, exactly. It looks good, but internally, like you're just keeping all of your pain at bay. Right.
Okay.
And then when things start to slow down, that's when it gives permission for it to come out.
So all of this is still in 2013. At what point does the rat with the arrow come into play?
That was during that time too. That was during that same time period.
During the same, like all the death threats, everything.
Death threats. And then, yeah, someone put a dead rat with an arrow in the front of my door.
Oh, now this is at your home.
This is at my home. So
is this the first time that something now happens at your home?
Correct. And the crazy thing is, like later on, I found out that, my boss lived like 5 miles away from me.
The one that you suspected doing all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then after that meeting where I was calling her shit, like it was, I don't know, it was pretty soon after that's when the rat was at my door.
Oh, wow.
And I had to file a police report.
Wow. Okay. And that was, your window was broken too in that.
My window was broken too. So this is where like it's really started to scare me because I'm like, this is getting really close to my personal life now.
It's at your personal life at this point. I mean, it's at your home.
And then, well, and then when I report, well, it could be random. It could just been a random thing. That's what it could have just, you can't prove that this was her or someone else, but
that's, again, what's crazy to me is if everybody in this environment knows that your patients, the people that you're helping, they don't have access to any of this personal information. If they all understand this, then they have to know that the person doing this is literally at that workplace. If these can make it into your work mailboxes, the person is there. And then if it gets to your home, the person is there. How do they not take this seriously?
No, I agree. And it was just, that was the environment. And then in my mind at the time, like I'm just trying to like, what's best for my family? What's best for me? And, in the long term, this will be better for me if this storm passes because we'll be in a better place. Right. And then, we were talking about kids. So I was thinking, well, what if she has to cut down her work or she doesn't work? Then this promotion will help me to offset some of these things. So like I was really in that space trying to think about like what would be best.
Yeah.
Even though the best thing was just to get the hell out of there. But in my mind at the time, like I'm still trying to make it work within that space.
You have your home. You guys want to have a baby. You're taking care of family. Yeah. It's wild. Okay, so what leads to the night of the DUI? What else continues to happen?
So that, like, I don't know, I forgot which day, but I show up to work, and then my workstation is destroyed. So like the keyboard's on the ground, the wires are cut, everything is like moved around, things are thrown to the ground, and then it's like, no one wants you here. There was a note, get the fuck out of here, no one wants you here.
Wow.
And then so I was like, that's it. So I left, I left. And then I should have done a better job of trying to find better representation. But I just went to the closest person that I could find in that area. A lawyer. And then let's just do this. Like I was just done.
So this is when you opened the lawsuit against the city.
Correct.
At that point. Okay.
Correct.
Because there was also like the people that you were supervising, some of them had reported
sexual assault. Assault.
I thought you were going to say something smaller.
No, sexual. There's rumors of like one of really high officials using sex to promote women.
Wow.
And then one of the people that was working overtime actually made the report and told me, she's like, I don't know whether I should report it or not. And then I felt like, I think if even if you don't report it, I think I have to report it because there's ethical things involved to do. And then I remember talking to someone else and they're like, don't do it.
Was this during the threats or was it before?
This was all during.
This is all during.
This is all during.
Okay.
And then I remember someone like, don't do it. Because if it gets attached to you, like even though it's supposedly anonymous, it's going to like ruin your career. But then at the time, like this was before the whole workstation thing. I did report it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know if they knew, didn't know, but I did it. I filed for that person.
I mean, it sounds like they knew. It sounds like
Probably.
okay. All right. So you filed the report on behalf of the employee.
Person.
You arrive that day. Your workstation is destroyed. Keyboard, wires cut with the note. And you leave and you go to the bar, or you left and you went and found a lawyer first.
I went and found a lawyer first, and then and then a couple of coworkers that were there like, hey, we'll take you out, and I was like, okay, because they felt bad for me.
Yeah.
And then I got really drunk.
You got drunk,
really drunk, like passed out drunk,
and somehow you made it back in the car. And this part's horrific.
Yeah, like I parked somewhere and then I ended up in the hospital. Luckily no one was hurt. I didn't hurt anybody, but I was in the hospital.
You just woke up in the hospital.
I was woke up in the hospital, and then they told me what happened. I was like, oh my God. But that was like, I don't drink like that. But that day, like I was just really, like in my mind at the time too, like even then, at the time, like I could look back and be like, man, you were really traumatized.
Yeah.
But at the time when that was happening, I was like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Like I was like, dude, why are you acting so careless? Right. So I was really like hating myself, like, oh my God, like what is wrong with me? Instead of like, hey, like you're going through a really hard time. Like maybe there's some trauma components involved, right? But I wasn't thinking that at the time.
But I guess the other insane part of this that I want to point out is this is all happening around licensed clinicians.
Correct.
And people that are supposed to be helping others.
Correct.
And people that are supposed to have their stuff together. And
people that are supposed to know about mental health, right? But I mean, true. So
I mean, it would be one thing. It would be equally horrific if it were, I don't know, happening at a school or happening, at the police department or the fire department. That's bad. But this is a place where people actually study mental health.
Yeah, they're trained. They're trained clinicians, psychologists, social workers, marriage and family therapists, and psychiatrists.
So not only are they not doing anything about it, but the other side of this is that even you, with your doctorate and all the education you have, aren't recognizing in the moment what's happening.
Yeah, because I'm so focused on just trying to make things work.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just putting out fire to fire in my life at that time.
So what happens after the DUI then?
Nothing. So then I make the report.
Which report?
I filed to the board like, hey, I got in a DUI. I filed it. And then
that's a requirement of your license, right?
Yeah, like you have to report anything that happened. So I reported it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't hear anything for 2 years. Like I didn't hear anything for 2 years. And then I was just trying to find work, during that time.
Why did you need to find work during that time? Was that something to do with the...
the lawsuit, like it's a work comp case. So they're supposed to place you in a job or like you get back pay, like you get like state assistance.
I see.
But then when I filed, I wasn't getting a job. So I had the human resources worker who didn't speak English. And then eventually like she was retired after a couple months. So the person that was assigned work was never transferred to anybody else.
So I have to like keep going into the detail on this because nobody knows the story that you're telling. So when you say you filed this lawsuit, your lawyer basically says that, because your lawyer has to make the claim, right? That you need to either get compensation or you need to be put into a job somewhere else.
Correct.
You're given neither.
Neither. And then when I filed the claims, they said I don't qualify for the claims.
That's nuts.
Yeah. So I wasn't getting paid at all.
Okay.
And then so during that period, like, I just was trying to find work, and then just try to maintain as much as I can, but then still try to be available because supposedly I'm supposed to go back.
And the city assigns you an HR person that doesn't speak English?
Doesn't speak English. And then eventually, like 2 months later, she was gone.
Dude, they're totally effing with you.
Yeah, I mean
everybody knows the the report that you filed on behalf of the employee. This is, at this point, it's like you are being railroaded.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say as a fact, but yeah, definitely, I was feeling that way.
Okay. And the lawyer can't do anything about this?
No, I mean, she tried to file the claims, but the claims were not going in. And she's like, we'll try to back pay it. But it just wasn't happening. And then, so I was just trying to maintain and just work. But then this was kind of the shift for me. This became like, I started working outside of those jobs. And then this is like the start of like slowly starting to become healthier because I started to be in healthier places and environments. So it was starting to shift of like, man, there's another world outside of the world that I was living in.
But another crazy thing about this too is that, okay, so you're assigned an HR person. Despite everything that you've been through, they don't allow you to seek counseling.
No, it was acupuncture and chiropractic services.
So you can't see a psychotherapist. You can't see anybody to actually help you, but they do allow you to see an acupuncturist and a chiropractor.
Correct. And then an eval. I had like one eval.
Yeah. That sounds like they're out to get you. I mean, like you can, shrug your shoulders, do it and whatnot. But it's not to say that you don't have mistakes along the way of this. Like the DUI is obviously
A big mistake.
a big one. But you're definitely targeted. So how long does this continue? You don't have, because we're talking like 2015 right now, right?
Yeah. So it was like years. So I think it was filed 2013. So I didn't get like a job offer, I don't think until like 2017.
Wow.
And then the 2017, like I was told, like you can work off some of the, like you can work some of the things off to get some of the compensation back. But then at the time, like I was really happy not being there. Like I was working at a clinic in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I was really happy. So at the time with my wife, she's like, kind of like Asian families, like it's all about stability. So when they hear government or something, like that's the most stable thing you should do. Like you should have that, the benefits, the insurance. So we were like, I was like, man, I'm so much happier not being there. But she was like, you need to go back.
Mm.
And then this was like a source of contention, like you need to go back. We're going to try and, have a baby and we're trying to make a family. You need to go back.
I see.
And we're really butting heads. I was like, what's the point of doing that if I'm not happy, right? But then even like my family and other people, like you should go back.
Wow.
So I did, and I lasted like 3 months.
That was in 2017 when you went back.
Yeah, I was like, 2017. And then I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. Like, I was just miserable. So then I left and then started, just building my own things, working through.
This is also when you published your first textbook, right? In 2017?
Yeah, I published my first textbook. So it was a graduate school textbook. So all like the lessons I learned with the psychiatrist. So I was working with the psychiatrist at the time too. So the one that trained me in the county, I was working with him in a private practice setting at that time too. So, I was just happier doing those things than what I was doing previously.
When did the board actually get back to you about the probation on the DUI?
So this is a crazy thing. So me and my wife, this is like a big source of contention. Remember like one of the, it was one of the reels where you talk about love, trust, and security. That was her biggest thing, was like love, trust, and security. The secure thing is to always go back. And then, so then another opportunity was like, they're like, hey, you can come back. And then, so I went back, but it was better. Like it was healthier, but I was not healthy at that time. Like it was just triggering. And then it was just not a good space. Like I just didn't want to be there.
But I mean the board though, because you had reported your own DUI.
Yeah.
And you didn't hear back from them for years, right? When did they actually reach out to say you're on probation?
The 2015.
Oh, that's 2015.
2015. So 2 years after I filed.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in 2017, when you're going back, you're under probation basically.
Correct.
Okay. You have your license, but you're under probation. Okay. Then you quit that one, but then there was still another one, right? In 2018, you got another county job?
Yeah, I got another county job. And then this was my own ignorance. Like I wasn't supposed to monitor hours, but I did. Because I didn't think it was that big of a deal.
I see.
Yeah. I was just like, yeah, cool. Like, because, in my mind, like, yeah, I'll just take care of it.
Yeah.
But
That's
it was
another one of your personal mistakes.
Personal
and when you say
mistakes.
monitoring hours, you mean like
Supervising hours.
supervising hours? Because
Correct.
people that want to get their license, they have to get
They
signed off on a
signed off
certain.
on hours, and yeah, I was not able to do that. So that was my fault. That was my own ignorance.
I see. Okay, so what continues to happen from there?
So, just that happened, and then when they were following up, like I think probation was getting close to an end. Like someone called my office because at this time, like I was supposed to get counseling.
Hmm.
So, with the psychiatrist I was working with, he was like, dude, like, I'll sign you off, but we're supposed to, like, it's supposed to be someone that you don't know.
I see.
But then we just, he was like, dude, like, just work and just do this. Like, we'll sign it off.
Yeah.
And then so we did. And then so I was just doing that. And sometimes, like, I would just write the report, and then he was like, here's something. He's like, just sign it. And I was like, cool. So I would just submit things in. And then, like, his wife, like, someone called.
Wait. So before we get into that, you're supposed to that's a requirement of your probation, right?
Probation, correct.
To go and
because
see.
of the DUI, yeah.
Okay. Because again, another kind of dumb
Mistake.
small one, considering like I would think most doctors in that position would do the same. Kind of how they write their own prescriptions, kind of how they like, I mean, we all do that, right? We all do that when we think that a rule is just a rule and it's not a big deal, then we kind of just do what we need to do and get done with it. I mean, you can find that example in every single instance. What discrimination training, and you're watching a video and you're like, I know this isn't really about me. Like, I understand who this is referencing in this place. And so you go and you just do what you got to do to get it signed off. So I get that aspect of it. That probably is one of the most understandable. The hours one was a little bit weird. Like you just didn't know.
I was just I mean, my attitude at the time was like,
whatever.
Like it's not a big deal, and that's my fault. Like clearly that is my fault.
Okay.
And so yeah.
Okay.
So that person calls, and then his wife is like,
who calls? Who?
The board calls, I think, to verify.
Okay, so the board calls your doctor's office.
Yeah, to verify, like, hey, do you know this person, and so on and so forth. Because I think it was nearing the end.
Mm-hmm.
And then she goes, oh no, he works here. He works here.
Who answered? Who's
the psychiatrist's wife, because she's
Okay.
also the secretary, so she didn't know.
Okay, so the board calls the office. I'm going to remind you. You got to talk as if nobody's heard this story before.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So the board calls the office to basically verify that you're in counseling. Your doctor's wife picks up the phone and says,
he's not in counseling. He works here.
okay.
And then so at that point, then I got a call back, and then they were like, yeah, this is really serious, and what are you doing? And then they were we might have to investigate his license as a psychiatrist. And so then I was like, man, this is my screw up.
Yeah.
And then I don't want it to affect him. So then, when all this was going down, I was just like, yeah, like it was my fault. I did it.
I see.
And then I was like, I don't want him to get in any trouble. Like I was just like, it's my fault.
Okay.
And then so my concern at that time was just to make sure that he didn't get in trouble. And then I was like, okay, yeah, it's completely my fault.
So you told him, don't worry about this. Just say you don't know anything about it.
Yeah, like don't deny it and say that, you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll take, it's my fault.
Well, that's what's crazy about it, because the board goes and writes up this document, which
Yeah.
I've seen. And the document basically says that you impersonated somebody, or that you.
Well, I mean, I did because
you signed on.
Yeah, because that's that we were doing that. He was doing that for me as a favor.
But in reality, this was you protecting a friend in terms of not getting him in trouble for your own mistake, which goes back to basically the DUI. That was the primary mistake here.
Correct.
That's kind of wild, because they wrote it up, and they basically took all these different instances that you personally reported, things that, hey, I sign off on hours I shouldn't have. This is my bad. They took all the things that you acknowledged and reported, most of which on your own, and then wrote it against you as if. And then they said, well, at that point, you basically had the choice. You keep fighting for your license.
Yeah, basically they were, when I had the meeting, they were nice about it. They were like, you can, because I was trying to explain, like, I know all this is happening, but I go, with everything that's taking place, like something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just trying to figure that out, so like in my mind, kind of like, they don't know the story. So like I'm just kind of just processing my own in my own head. Like I'm just trying to figure out what's happening
Yeah.
with me personally. So yeah, so they were like, yeah, but you have to go through another set of tests and you got to prove that this is the case and you got to. And at that point, like I was just done. Like I just didn't want to do this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like in my mind, like similar, like no disrespect, but like similar to like that job of the boss having value to me. Like it just lost value to me too. Like, and I lost value to myself at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was just like really unhappy, really depressed, really disappointed in myself. But I also wanted something different.
Mm-hmm.
Like not only career wise, but even in my marriage. Like I wanted to be able to go back and just be like, look, I can't do this anymore. Like I'm going to have to live a truth and I don't know what's going to happen, but you can leave me.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to live my truth.
So you decide to surrender the license as opposed to continue fighting it.
Correct. And then I got calls from like other attorneys. Like they were, I was like a month period, like you can win this case and da da da. I just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a part of this world anymore.
I mean, you for sure could have won the case, but again, at what cost, right? Because we're talking about decisions and what are the costs of these decisions. And each one of the decisions that you had made had basically snowballed into something bigger. And at that point, you decide to go and get another lawyer. The cost then becomes another 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, it was just not worth it to me. The emotional toll, like that I was already going through, like it was just not worth it.
Yeah.
And no disrespect to other people and their experiences. And I'm not disrespecting the license, but just for me, like it wasn't worth it.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing because my father went through a similar lawsuit where there was a lot that could be proven about discrimination and about workplace harassment and all this stuff. Tons of evidence for it. And yet the lawyer that he found, which you have to pay out of pocket to unless they're willing to do it on, spec and whatnot. But he's paying this lawyer and the lawyer says these cases are very difficult to prove. And he continues, fighting this suit for, I don't know, this was like 4 or 5 years before eventually, there's a paltry settlement on the table that basically just allows him to recoup his legal expenses. And that's it. And you get so emotionally tired of this thing dragging on and it's just exhausting. And he takes the settlement. So, I mean, you can drop the case because you were basically offered a settlement at that point, right, from the city.
Correct.
So you could drop the case then and just move on with your life, or you could spend another 4 to 5 years and get a bigger settlement.
But I'm still living in that world, and to me at the time, I just wanted out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like there's trauma components involved too. Like you're more impulsive, but just in my mind, like I just wanted out.
Yeah, one of the signs of PTSD, right, is
impulsiveness. And I was very impulsive. Like you could see the impulsiveness increasing over this period of time.
That also seems like the body's way of kind of telling you, like, get out, like get out, make a decision, make one quick because this is
not good. I'm in constant danger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of a wild ride, dude. Like this story leading up to you choosing to give up the license and kind of move on. But what at that point happens?
So at that point, like,
because you mentioned earlier, you said that at one point your wife, you said to her like you could leave, but
yeah. So like after this whole incident, I talked to my wife. Well, at first I was a specialist because I was like, I think I have PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was diagnosed with major depression, and they're like, you just have depressive issues. And this is the crazy thing: the person that did the eval, they're like, you're too successful to have PTSD. So you shouldn't have it. You don't have it.
Wow.
So it was like being punished for being able to do my job. And even like during these periods, like I was able to hold my job together, but my functioning on my personal level was getting lower. And so when I went to a specialist, because I was like, man, I think there's like more trauma here. They did scans and all of these other things. They're like, dude, your brain is like a person that just came back from war. Like all of the years accumulated.
Yeah.
Like it gave me some solace. It gave me a lot of peace. Like, okay, at least it explains some of my behaviors that I'm really ashamed of.
Yeah.
So that part was really helpful.
That's what's interesting about, because, I remember one thing too, where, because on a brain scan, you can actually see PTSD.
You can.
At one point, didn't they say to you, like, there's no evidence of you having these issues?
Yeah, during the suit, right?
during the lawsuit, right?
Yeah,
Who was it that said that during the lawsuit?
it was part of it. Like they when you go to a case, like it's like a pie, and then they want to chip away to see like if you have other issues, so they could reduce the payout. So like during that time, yeah, there was a lot of that being said back and forth.
Where they're saying basically like there is no evidence of.
Yeah, and you're too high functioning. You shouldn't be able to teach and do this if you're really traumatized. It's not that bad.
Wow.
That kind of stuff. So it was just very like legal, like the whole experience.
But this brain scan now after the fact showed.
But this was on my own. So this was more for me. So like it became instead of like trying to prove something or this is for this case, like I just went for me.
Yeah.
And then I was like, man, that's really relieving. And then so I was like, wow, this is cool. Like I'm really excited to work with this person. Except when the person told me, like, given your case,
The doctor that did the
doctor,
brain scan.
correct, the doctor, and he gave me a medical model treatment plan, which was you need to lower your standards, you need to simplify your life and not expect so much out of your life anymore.
Interesting.
And that's when I was like, no, like that's not going to happen because in my mind at that time there was a freedom, and then all my emotions, because they're like, emotions, you got to be really careful, and I was like, I'm going to honor every emotion I have because
Yeah.
there's a freedom right now, and I'm just going to see where it takes me. Like I went on this journey of trying to figure life out. Like it was not about anything else, not about money, not about status, not about anything. It was just about me trying to figure out like why I'm here and to make sense of everything that happened and to kind of push this forward in a more positive way.
Yeah.
And so that's when I was like, okay, I'm done with you. Thank you, but no thanks.
That's an interesting thing because my father had, I find that the medical model often leads you to that place where my dad has anxiety and these types of things. And the doctor again comes to him and prescribes something and then says, now you just need to avoid things that make you anxious and avoid situations that are stressful and avoid.
Yeah.
So what do you end up doing? You stay home. Like that is the only option at that point. But that seems so, it surprises me that is the typical guidance that I hear more often than not versus like, okay, if this were any other muscle, you'd say we need to work it out. We need to go to physical therapy. We need to train the muscle and retrain the muscle. But here it's no, like just go and avoid those situations, which makes the problem worse.
Reduce your stress triggers so
Yeah.
that you don't have them and then live a kind of contained and safe life. So that was the advice.
That's wild.
And
But
then
this, enough at this point to say that that's not what I'm going to
that's not what I'm going to do. And then so I started really exploring, holistic alternatives and research. And then this is when I took the full-time job at Whittier.
Okay.
So I'm
You took your professor.
job. So I was telling my wife, like when all this happened, I was like, look, I've tried like doing what's supposedly secure and all these things, but I can't live that way anymore. Like I'm not happy. Like even if we were to have a kid and then we're bringing them into this world where I'm living this way, I wouldn't want my kid to live in this world. So you can leave me, but I'm going to do what I want to do and I got to live my own truth. And I'm going to pursue things that I'm passionate about. And if that's safe to me, and if that's not safe to you, then you're more than welcome to leave. And that's where like our marriage, like all of the BS and this, it got to the core of what are we going to do? Like, this is what's important to me. This is how I want to live. What about for you? And that's where like things started to turn around.
Yeah.
So our marriage started getting better.
So this not only the process not only led to you becoming a professor at Whittier, but now you're moving into the department chair position. You're going to be going for tenure soon. You've written books.
I've written books. Yeah, I wrote Upside Down. So Upside Down was like all of the research and then all of the work with like holistic people and experts and like trauma triggers and emotional triggers. That was the culmination of the work that I did.
Yeah.
And then so I wrote that, and then I started treating people using that model. Started a coaching business, which then led to us working together.
Yeah.
I'm program director on path to be a department chair at Whittier College, which is unheard of in a 3-year period.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Right. I'm going to have a textbook that's going to be out, that's going to be used throughout the school. Right. And the other thing too is like I'm working with like other industry experts that are like into like holistic approaches, publishing companies to create an accredited school So we're building it from the base, from a junior college to a bachelor's program to a grad school program that incorporates science, that incorporates the medical model, like diagnosing, all knowing how to do those things, but also holistic alternatives, media, social media. Like it's going to be an all-encompassing school, and then it's eventually going to lead to relicensing. So like this thing about losing the license, which I was like, I went through this whole process. It's going to be something that's going to encompass a more detailed requirement that's going to cover more holistic alternatives, including the medical model as well.
Interesting.
And that's where my life has shifted.
Yeah. It's coming onto this side of it. Like you've come fully through this, and you've now come to a position where all the experiences have led you to thrive. But in those moments, back in 2018, 2019, that's most certainly not how it feels. When you're stepping away from something, it does feel like it's the end.
Yeah, it felt like, everything that was crystallized in my life, that was my identity, exploded. And it was like, you're not any of these things anymore.
Put back the pieces together.
Yeah. So at the time, I'm like, man, this is scary and depressing.
Yeah.
But now, like, I could look back and be like, wow, this was like the birth of like the next phase of my life. And I'm so thankful to be on this other side.
Well, and truthfully, it is the exact process that you went through that I feel like led me to see what you had to offer in terms of being a partner. And what I mean by that is, like, I have, and we'll get to this when we get to, my story in the next episode, but I've met with many counselors, many doctors, many people that I don't feel like they know what they're doing, nor do I feel like they deserve the licenses that they hold. And their approach to everything is very symptomatic, avoidance. It's the same stuff that we would typically hear. We're going to address what we see, not the actual underlying issues. And so you writing upside down and creating this entire process of working from trauma to actually identify and go backwards, that didn't lead to me. That led to when I read that, and when you actually, because before we started this partnership, I actually hired you, and I just said, if you want to be my partner, because you called me at that point, you're like, we need to partner. We need to create something. This book is going to change things. And I go, well, why don't I just hire you to be my counselor? And I gave you that, warning. I don't believe in this process. So with knowing that, Glenn, go ahead.
Yes, at full price.
At full price. And within the first session, I said, this is different. This is unique, because you were using everything from a clinical standpoint to address the issues. But then when you did find issues, and we found trauma, we found triggers, it wasn't about controlling the environment. It was about individual accountability and responsibility. How do you actually resolve this? And that was huge, because up until that point, I'd always learned that, when someone identifies those, you now control the triggers. Go and tell people around you, tell your wife, tell your partner, don't say these types of things to me, because it's going to trigger me. When you have, trauma, avoid environments that remind you, and that's not something that you can, if you want to be a whole person in this world, you can't do that. If you want to go outside of your door, if you want to get on the internet, if you want to do anything, it's not possible, because you can't avoid all those situations. So when it came to that place and you identified it, then it became internal. How are you accountable? What does this mean? And you actually started working through those. And I thought, as soon as you did that, I was like, this is different. This is unique. You have used a pain point to find a personal area of development, and then helped me to understand from a psychotherapy and academic side what needs to be done. That was very special. And it was the missing piece to basically what I have, which is this roadmap of here's what a healthy relationship looks like. But you got to figure out your own trauma, your own, past issues.
What you bring to the table. Like, every partner has to be responsible for the baggage that they bring to the relationship.
For sure.
And sometimes, like, it gets traditional couples counseling, it all gets enmeshed. Couples problems and individual problems, they need to be separated out.
Yeah.
And then once each person can take ownership for what they brought to the relationship, then you can focus on what are the actual couple's issues and start working things out.
Yeah. So that was really unique. And it was you going through that 10-year process, which was I mean, just talking about it is hell, to be honest. Like when I hear you say it, it's horrific because of all the different points along the way that, like, not only could you have made a decision to leave earlier, but then how many people around you were just suffering it to be the way it was. This is the way it is. Despite the fact that we're all, medical, we're all counselors and trained therapists. We're just going to leave this system how it is.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, when I was going through the process and people knew about it and I was like sharing what was happening, like people would literally clutch their chest
Yeah.
at me, like, because they were scared.
It's a terrifying story.
Like, but not only like, man, like, I don't want to be associated with you because I don't want to lose my job.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of thing. And then like years later, like, years after, people will come to me and they're like, oh, how'd you do that? And you look so much happier. And then I could look back and I'm almost clutching my chest like, I'm so glad I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being so incredibly transparent with this whole story. I think it lends a lot of meaning and value into what you're doing now and what we're doing together in this process.
No, I appreciate that. And, just a couple of things. Like, one, trauma doesn't discriminate. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, your title, your job position, degrees, it doesn't matter. Like, trauma doesn't discriminate. And then number two, like, if people find disappointment in this, I understand, but I would hope that people would see everything in a more holistic and in a total sense, like seeing it as a whole.
What do you think they might be disappointed by?
The fact that, if you just look it up, like, dude, you're a crappy person or something like that.
It's interesting because, without understanding any of the details, I think it's hard to make that kind of a judgment. But knowing the details of the story, I think you made a wise and healthy decision. And I think you've moved on to something that you'll be able to dramatically help and affect far more people, especially having had that experience.
Yeah. And the other thing too is everything that we do, like, I did it myself.
Yeah.
So it's not something that, I'm just saying to do it. Like, I did it. And that's why the nuance and the details as we go through it, that's why it becomes very emotional.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, brother.
Thank you.
All right. So for those of you that are listening, we're going to go into episode 10. And so episode 10 is kind of the flip side. It's kind of my story, and we're talking about kind of our biggest pains in leading up to this place. And then from here on out in the podcast, it's really going to be about our case studies. They're going to be client case studies, and everything, of course, is obviously kept completely anonymous and whatnot. But we're going to talk about real life scenarios and situations. And so we thought it would make sense in our first 10 episodes to give you guys a really good background on why it is that we do what we do and why we're here. So in the meantime, you guys can follow us, well, pretty much anywhere at 12 Week Relationships. We'd love for you guys to subscribe to the podcast, which is on Spotify, on iTunes, and you can also watch on YouTube. You can also go to 12weekrelationships.com. We actually have a quiz now available. So there's a relationship assessment quiz that you guys can take, and you can also sign up for a free 20-minute consult with Dr. Glen. That's it for us.
Thank you.
All right, guys.
Thank you so much.